I'm walking along a wood line, and I look, and there's a cow, just one cow coming up, grazing by itself. I was like looking around, making sure there was nothing else to see me. So I scoot up, I get ready, looking down my scope, I glass it, make sure that it's a cow. I don't see any antlers sticking out, nothing. I'm like, okay, I'm going to pull the trigger. Well, I get all sighted up, front shoulder, pull the trigger, and the rock that I'm leaning on just explodes in front of me. And I was like, what the crap just happened? And that's when I realized that my barrel was up against the rock, and I had a clear shot with my scope, but my barrel wasn't clear. And it was a super rookie mistake of not taking the time to see that, hey, dummy, your barrel has to clear the rock first.
This is the Aptitude Outdoors podcast, where we interview travelers, explorers, and outdoorsmen and women to bring you the best tips and stories from around the world. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Aptitude Outdoors podcast. Thanks for tuning back in. Today, have a special guest, Wesley Littlefield of Your Bass Guy. Wesley, how are you doing today, man?
Man, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me today, Paul.
Absolutely. So anybody who's followed what I've been doing, knows that I've been getting really into fishing hard over the last couple years. And particularly bass fishing, I enjoy just because they're big. like anybody else, you want to catch a big fish around the Midwest where I'm at, bass is the way to go. How did you get into bass fishing specifically? Like, what made you choose to target on your YouTube channel bass fishing?
So growing up, I was big time into the outdoors. My dad was a big influence, and we would go fishing all the time. And then my grandpa was also a pretty big bass angler specifically. And we had farm ponds we would go to. And so I could literally walk out our back door, and in 2 minutes I'm at the pond fishing, as a 8-9-year-old kid. And one summer specifically, I cast out, and I'm probably perch fishing something by myself, and I hook into a little bluegill or whatever, and all of a sudden this monster just comes swarming out of the water, breaks my line, and it was at that moment I was like, I'm going to catch this fish. So I went back to the house, and I got like catfish gear. I mean, I was making sure that my line was not going to break. I went and caught another bluegill, threw it out in the pond, waited forever, and finally that bass hit again weeks later, whenever it was. And I brought it home, and I was showing my dad, happy, excited and all this stuff. And then I was like, I'm going to eat this fish. And so we ate it. But of course, my parents took a picture and sent it into the local news, who they had like just a featuring little kids fishing kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And so I got on the local news at one time and stuff, and that started my love for it. And I told my grandma that I wanted to be a fisherman and a carpenter like Jesus, and it just kind of never went back. I didn't really pursue the carpentry stuff, but the fishing stuff stuck.
Well, fishing's awesome because I think it has a low level entry for a lot of people. Like it can be fairly inexpensive.
Yeah.
Or it can be insanely expensive depending on
yes, how far you want to get into it.
Yeah, so one of the things that I watch a lot of YouTube videos and stuff about just, better tactics, better ways to fish, better baits to use. And there's so many options on the market for things. I mean, there's chatterbaits, there's 1,001 soft plastics, then you got like crankbaits. There's just anything under the sun you can think of. And one of my biggest downfalls, I guess, is I'm like, if I'm not catching them immediately, I'm like switching lures every 5 seconds, trying to like get something to happen. So if you had like a basics, like back to the basics, if you had to if you were going bass fishing, you had like 30 seconds to grab a few things, what would you throw in your tackle box for running out the door?
So I'm like a huge power fisherman. So it's going to be a crankbait, a spinnerbait, or a chatterbait is going to be like my go-to lure. But then I also catch a ton of bass on just like a Cinco. And my favorite way to rig it is wacky rig. I just seem like I get more bites that way. And of course, like you said, I love catching big fish, But I'm kind of like you. If I'm not getting a bite, I don't care if they are little 6 inches or whatever. I still want to catch something. So I think that wacky rig is one of the best ways just to get a bite. And that's going to be, my go-to starting things. Throughout the years, like you, I've looked into more advanced tactics or whatever, and it hasn't yielded me as great as results as what, and I'm not an expert in those either. So that's probably why. But my beginner go-to stuff was like a crankbait or a chatterbait, because they're just, you cast it out there, and as long as you're making contact with something, it's going to work. And even if you're not making contact, sometimes you'll get a bite. And then a wacky rig, you cast it out there and let it float down and pop it a little bit and reel it back in, and it's super easy to fish as well. And that's kind of my go-tos.
Yeah, I like to, growing up, until I was 32 years old, 32 years old, we only ever fished top water. That's all we ever fished, because that's what my dad had. He just had my parents have a lake place up in Michigan, and he just had all the fishing gear. So it never occurred to me to go buy different stuff and try different tactics. I was like, all we got is top water. We got the, frogs or jitterbugs and stuff like that. And it just never occurred to me, I can try different things. And I would get so frustrated, because it's these things don't work unless it's midnight. You know what I'm like?
Yes.
So my dad's still convinced that you only should fish those, which I'm convinced the opposite. I've switched pretty much to soft plastics, and I've had so much more success than I've ever had on, Ned rig or drop shot or something. I don't know if I'm leading to a question here, I promise. The thing that I have a hard time with, do you think regionally where you're at, you're in Oklahoma, right?
Yep. Tulsa area.
Tulsa, Oklahoma. So I'm up in Northwest Ohio, Southeast Michigan region. Okay. Do you think that the style of fishing depends on where you're at, what works better, or do you think it just depends on if you're doing it correctly, I guess is what I'm asking? There's so many variables, but in the end, that's what I'm getting at.
So believe it or not, my wife's family's from northeastern Michigan. And so I go up there, and her parents have a cabin that we go in on a lake that we go and fish. And so my first time fishing up there was a few years ago. And I did try to take a lot of my tactics that I use down here and fish up there. And the conditions were totally different than what I'm used to fishing. My area, we have a lot of dirty, muddy water, and, they're man-made lakes, and there's all kinds of factors that go into it. So power fishing, what is the way to go down here, just because the bass need that movement to be able to find the lure usually. Now, I'm not saying that like I said, I catch a lot on soft plastics too, but usually it just helps them find that lure. But when I went up to Michigan, I was able to use the wacky rig and just start whacking fish with it. It was insane. And I couldn't believe, it helped me realize that the location actually matters a lot where I'm fishing. Up there, as you know, they're natural lakes. So that were actually created by glaciers, and there's a lot of rock piles just randomly in the lake. And there's not a river channel that I'm used to fishing even. And so it was just that kind of concept to where I do think that lures matter a lot. But if you're actually fishing in the right location with the wrong lure, you're still going to catch a few fish. Whereas if you're fishing in the wrong location altogether, you can be fishing the perfect lure and not get any bites, if that makes sense and kind of answers the question.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that's kind of how I was thinking about it too, because it's every time I go to a new lake, everything's different. Even around here where I live in Northwest Ohio locally, there's a few reservoirs within 10 or less minutes from my house. I think there's 3 or 4 that I can get to with under a half hour. And they're all completely different. They all have I fish them completely differently. One is just I was just throwing Ned rigs, and before they hit the bottom, I'm just nailing bass left and right. And then the other lake, which are the other reservoir right down the road. It's a lot dirtier water. It's a lot more, there's like the visibility is a lot less. And I always tried every bait I had. I tried chatterbaits, swim baits, crankbait, everything that you could think of, and they just would not bite. So I don't know. It's just, the water is so different everywhere that I think that's why I like fishing so much, is it's like a continuous puzzle. Like you just continually trying to figure out what's working. And do you find that certain lakes are better to fish than others regardless of where they're at, just because of, I don't know what, like there's so many factors that go into what's a good lake or what's a good reservoir or creek or pond or whatever?
So yes, I live like 2 minutes away from a reservoir, and 99% of the time of the year, it's like, looks like chocolate milk. Mm-hmm. During the winter, it'll clear up and we'll have 2 foot of visibility. But most of the time, it's just a muddy river that flows through, and it's always dirty looking water. And it's not known for bass fishing. Now, of course, we have like the local jackpot every Tuesday night and stuff that go, and guys know how to go out and where to go and catch them. But then I also live just 35, maybe 45 minutes away from Grand Lake, which is known all around the country as one of the best bass fishing lakes. All kinds of big major tournaments are held on it. And it's, they're not that far apart, but they fish completely different, because Grand Lake, it actually has a little cleaner river running into it. So it's a little clearer water. And, it's just got a lot more features that are great for bass fishing. Now, Oologah Lake is an excellent catfishing lake. And a lot of people don't know that, just because of, and I really don't know the factors. I mean, catfish don't necessarily use their eyes, I think would be one big factor to find the fish. But my grandpa's told me stories of him running jugs and trot lines and catching 75-pound flatheads out of Oologah Lake. But, like the biggest bass caught out of there, I think the lake record's around 8 pounds. Mm-hmm. So it's not it's a big bass, but not a giant bass that you would expect. Whereas you go just an hour and a couple other directions. Like I know we've got a lake there's 3 lakes specifically that I really like to fish, that are really clear water, or lakes, man-made reservoirs. I call them all the same. Mm. And they're clear water, and they're excellent, like smallmouth fishing. And so, but like I said, it's all in the general area, like you're saying, but they all fish completely differently. Yeah. Like, I mean, I don't fish the way, if I try to fish the same way I do on Oologah as I did on the other lakes, it just wouldn't work out for me. I've tried that and I've got skunked many times, because I just go back to my old ways instead of saying, hey, let's try something different. Let's not force the fish into your pattern. You fish the pattern. Yeah,
that's the hardest thing too, is not trying to revert back to like what because I have a buddy that I go fishing with all the time, and if like he will just throw a like a Senko all day long. He'll just like throw it and throw it and throw it, and I'm like, dude, try something else. And he's like, no, this is how I always catch fish. I'm like, yeah, but it's been 2 hours and you haven't caught anything. Maybe we should switch something up. And now that I've introduced the Ned rig to him, he's just like obsessed with it. And I don't know what like everybody talks about Ned rig this, Ned rig that now. It's like all I see on social media and stuff. Why do you think that's such a successful bait? It's nothing impressive. It's just a jig with a little like half of a Senko on it, essentially.
Yeah. And I think it comes to the simplicity. Like for me, I don't like the super complicated technique that you got to do. Like even I recently did a video for Your Bass Guy about the Carolina rig, and I don't like having to tie 3 knots on the Carolina rig. So I rarely use it, because it's a little more complicated to tie and takes a longer time. So if I can tie on a lure or something that's real quick, like a Ned rig, then I'm going to do that. And a Ned rig, anybody can fish it. You cast it out there and let it sit there for a little bit and bounce it back to you a little bit and let it sit there again. So it's not like there's a complicated technique to go with it or anything like that. It's just simple. And then the fact that bass actually eat it, I think that's another, if it was simple and it didn't work, I don't think people would use it. I would hope not anyways.
Well, it's funny because I was fishing we have a river up here, the Maumee River, and it's like you said, it's just dirty and muddy all the time. So, I was just throwing a Ned rig and it's real snaggy on the bottom. So like I kind of was like expecting to lose a few, but essentially I was getting hits on it, like pretty hard hits, but they weren't taking it. It was just like bam, and then they'd take off before I could even like hook set or anything. And it was really, it was weird. But then the guy next to me was throwing just a regular jig head with just like a little tail on it, and he was catching fish. So I switched over to that, and then nobody caught any fish after that. So I think a lot of it is just like bad luck sometimes.
That's funny. Yeah, that's usually my luck though too. I'm like, hey, what lure are you using? Okay, switch over that. And then the fish are like, I don't want that anymore. And it's like, okay, well, late to the party.
Yeah. Well, one of the videos that you put out that I thought was really cool was about the Garmin 4. I can never remember the name of it. The Garmin Striker 4.
Yeah, the Striker.
Yeah. The Striker 4. Like you did a video on the Striker 4, and I think I bought the Striker 4 Plus because it had the mapping capability on it where you can kind of like mark spots and it tracks your GPS. Dude, that thing rules. I absolutely love that fish finder. Like, what a deal.
And that was my thing. Like, right when I was getting into kayak fishing several years ago, I didn't want anything super complicated and expensive because even now I get overwhelmed with all the features. Like I'm upgraded and I still don't understand all the features that come with this thing. I'm not able to use it the way it was intended. But that Striker 4, I can throw it on my kayak, go out, and I'm like, hey, look, I mainly use it for like depth because finding fish on it, it's like, is that really a fish or is that a log? Or, it's kind of one of them things. But as far as the depth and being able to mark your spots and locations for like what, $150 or cheaper, it's like, that's hard to beat. And it's small enough. If you're fishing a kayak, it ain't going to take up too much room and stuff. So you're absolutely right. I loved fishing and I still use it, even though I've got my other one too. But yeah, it's a great little fish finder.
What drew you
for a beginner?
Yeah, absolutely. What drew you to wanting to get into kayak fishing? Because I've recently done a lot of kayak fishing myself as well. And my personal reason is it's like a kayak's much more affordable than a bass boat. You can get into tiny little spots that not a lot of people can get into. So what kind of drew you to it?
So my grandpa had a little bass tracker, and in college I was like, oh, I'll go, do some collegiate fishing tournaments. Well, that bass tracker isn't enough to keep up with any of those guys. And I'm not going to go spend, like you said, $70,000 on a boat. Forget that. And I don't even, it'd take me 20 years to pay off. So I was like looking around, and then I had a buddy who was like, hey, check out these new canoes. And I was like, what's a new canoe? I'd grown up with canoes and kayaks, but they were always just cheapo, depot kind of stuff. We found it at a garage sale or something. And I was like, what the heck is this? So I went and looked at them online, and they were fishing kayaks essentially. But I wanted something too that would translate into like duck hunting. And I saw the wide open platform of the new canoes, and I was like, dude, this would be perfect. I can set it up for fishing during the summer, and then when I'm time to go duck hunting, I can set it up and go. And ended up buying one and loved it. And they came out with a little better design, and I bought the unlimited next. And so the draw for kayak fishing was really partly nostalgic because, like I said, we had farm ponds growing up, so I'd drag the kayak down there and paddle around and play before kayak fishing was cool. And then I got out of it for a little while in college and stuff. And then my buddy came along and said, hey, check out kayak fishing if you like it. I did. I love it. And here we are today. I'm still tinkering around with it and trying to figure it all out.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for checking out this episode. If you feel like you're getting something out of it, go down in the link below and buy me a coffee. The Aptitude Outdoors podcast is fully self-funded by me. So if you're digging it, I'm just throwing out a tip jar, and I appreciate you listening. Let's dive right back into this episode. I'm not the kind of guy that enjoys bank fishing very much. Like, I get so bored. Like, I will like I'll stand on the dock and I'll cast like 10 times. And if there's nothing going on, I'll just like go back and drink beer or something. Like I'm just like, I'm not patient enough to sit on a bank and fish all day long. Like, so like catfishing, yeah, that's one thing. You can just throw a rod out there and hang out and chill and like just wait. But I prefer to be active. So like the guys that I kind of fish with, they're very much in the mindset of like, if it's not working, just go somewhere else and move on. So like that's just ingrained in my brain. And in the kayak, I can just hop in, give it 10 minutes at a spot. Even if there's a fish finder saying there's fish stacked up under me, if I've tried everything I could think of and they're not biting, I'm just moving, because it's like there's no point in sticking around trying to catch fish that don't want what you're giving them. In my opinion. So I think it's cool. And even nowadays, even like the shitty kayaks that are like super cheap from Walmart or something, you could still deck them out with rod holders and fish finders. And even if you're just like wanting to tool around, and I think it's super awesome to get more people out on the water, because even with little kids, like you take them off a dock and they get bored like so easily. But then if you take them on a kayak, they probably end up dropping their pole in the water too. So it's like a give and take, you know?
Well, that's funny. Like I take my daughter a lot, and my mom and dad I got them into kayak fishing now too. And, you know, they started with cheaper kayaks and now they're into pedal kayaks and they've went all out too. But they bought little floats for your rod. Oh, yeah. And so if they do drop it, or if my daughter drops it, then you don't lose your rod and reel. And that's funny you say that. But like with her, we went on a float trip recently this summer, and the fishing wasn't great. The water's usually clear and it was like chocolate milk murky, but I was catching them, but she wasn't. So she was bored. And finally she was just like, Dad, can I go swimming or whatever? And so, you know, she was floating by the kayak, or we'd stop and she'd swim a little ways. And I think that's what is great. Like, you know, sure, you can do that from the bank too, but like on a river, it's a little sketchier. Whereas, you know, in this instance, she always had her life jacket on, of course. Just I'm not going to risk that. That's my big – I always wear a life jacket if I'm floating on in a kayak. And so she could just hop out and go swimming, and I could keep fishing. And it wasn't like I was forcing her to be there. She was still having fun, where I think that's where I've gone wrong a lot is, no, this is fun. You're going to have fun. And it's like, but she's not having fun, Wes. Yeah. You know? And so – I think that's part of the allure to me for kayak fishing is it is very versatile. You know, like you said, you can pick up and move to a different spot if they're not biting, or you can go paddle around and enjoy the views. Like a few weeks ago, August is a terrible time to go bass fishing. I can't seem to catch anything during August because it's hot and nasty, but I took some time to actually just sit there and relax and enjoy watching the sun come up. And we were on a real beautiful, pretty clear lake and stuff. And I was like, this is beautiful. And then 4 hours later, I still hadn't caught anything. I was like, it's still pretty, but I'm hot, tired, and want to go home.
Well, that's what I was joking with my buddy the other day, and I was out fishing. I didn't catch a damn thing. And he was just like, oh, how was the fishing? I was like, I didn't go fishing. I went kayaking, dude. I don't know what you're talking about. You can just write it off, man. Like, no, I just want a nice afternoon kayak trip. So exactly. It is really fun. But I do like what you said about wearing a life jacket. And I think a lot of the times especially like outdoors, recreational stuff, hunting, fishing stuff, a lot of dudes want to be like, oh, I'm macho, I don't need that crap. But dude, like, I do not play around on the water. It is so dangerous, especially in a river. Like a river is 100% life jacket all the time. I mean, obviously there's been times where I haven't worn a life jacket. Like just if I'm like out on a lake, just sitting around doing nothing or something. Yes, I should wear a life jacket, but sometimes I don't. But like, if I'm actively doing something, like for instance, this last weekend I went on the river here. August is a terrible time to kayak on this river. It's like a foot deep if you're lucky in some spots. I ended up walking most of the river. And, you know, people underestimate how little it takes to screw up on a river and like flip. Like I have a lot of kayaking experience, like on big water, on rivers, on whatever. And I ate shit so hard this weekend just because the rocks are so slippery, and the water's sliding over them. And it's like, if I wouldn't have had my life jacket on, I fell into like a little pool. And I mean, it's not super dangerous or anything, but like I went under, and you get disoriented so fast. You could slip and bust your head on a rock, like, and go unconscious. And without a life jacket, I mean, you're just down there in the water. So I think that's super cool that you say that. And I think more people need to talk about that overall, because like, it's like when people ride motorcycles without helmets. I'm like, what's sissy about not wanting to die? Like, I don't get it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Like, I do a lot of duck hunting and stuff, and from a boat, and my buddies, most of them don't wear a life jacket. I'm like, dude, number one, we're duck hunting. The water is cold. Yeah. So you're going to get I don't care if we are wearing waders and stuff. You're going to get hypothermia if you fall in from hitting a stump, whatever. And number two, I mean, it's a camo life jacket, so it's not like I'm wearing a bright orange thing. It's like I look cool. So if you don't want to look cool, then fine. But I'm with you. Like, I'd rather make it back home to my family and look like a dork than not make it back home to my family.
Yeah, and one of the things with fishing, talking about high end gear and stuff, obviously, like my whole thing I always talk about so often is like, in my opinion, gear doesn't matter at all. Like, even if you're like an expert, you could still catch fish with a $30 Shakespeare from Walmart. Guaranteed. There are advantages to having nicer equipment, especially if you're like, that's your thing. You're nerding out fully into fishing. Yeah. What's your opinion on gear specifically? Like, do you think it matters overall, not in certain aspects, like better gear ratios or whatever? Like, I'm talking like, if you want to fish, do you need expensive gear?
So I have to be honest, but my wife's in the background listening. So I'm about to shoot myself in the foot here, but I really don't think that, like, I think people make more out of gear than it really is. Like me, I'm a sucker for the newest, latest, greatest stuff as much as anybody. I want the latest, greatest, best thing, but I can take it out there and I can get skunked every single time. Like, it's not making me a better fisherman by going out and buying more expensive gear. Where I grew up, and we weren't poor, but we didn't have a lot of money, middle class kind of average people. And my favorite fishing pole was an ugly stick that actually had the tip broke off for a while. And for whatever reason, I loved fishing with this fishing pole growing up, and I caught a lot of fish with it. But, it was really a piece of junk. I mean, it was a broken fishing pole, and I was still able to catch fish with it. Now, granted, if I had the $400 fishing pole, latest, greatest, would I have caught more fish? I doubt it, but maybe. Yeah. It's just, I do think that we get caught up in, consumerism of having the next, latest, greatest stuff, where even in some of my videos and articles, I'll write that, we get caught up in, what's the best rod and reel combo do you throw with this? And I'm like, whichever one you got. Like, I'm not going to tell you go out and buy a brand new rod and reel just because, somebody else told me to say that. Like, it's like, I've got my rods and reels that I like and I use, and I throw everything on it. I don't have a huge collection of rod and reels, although of course I wish I did, but I don't. So, I mean, it all works. Is it the best option for it? Maybe not, but it still catches fish.
Yeah, I mean, I caught one of the biggest bass in my life on like a $70 combo, like spinning reel, I think it was like a Ugly Stick GX2 or something. I don't know. Everybody said that this rod is mine, and I do not remember buying it. So I don't know where it came from. It was just at the lake. So I've been using the hell out of it because it's there. And like, it's a great rod. I love that rod. It's probably one of the lower end medium rods. I mean, but I see people out there with like $300, $400, $500 rods, and I'm like, that's like all my fishing equipment put together in one rod. And they're like, is it really making you that much better? Like, I don't know. And
yeah, that's me, is like, if you can't catch them on the cheap stuff, upgrading your rod and reel isn't going to do much for you. You need to learn the basics of fishing and go back. And at least that's my opinion. I mean, sure, all the professionals have the high end stuff, but if you go back and ask them, I guarantee you stick something cheap in their hands, like a $75 combo, then they're going to be able to go out and fish them because they know how to fish versus all the fancy gear that's making them good.
Well, one of the things that really, I've always been like not a big gearhead. I have gear, obviously. Anybody who's ever seen anything I've done, obviously, I have a ton of gear. But like, I am not big on like, this is the only brand that I'll do, and I need this X sweet new $400 reel or whatever. Like, I'll go to Bass Pro and I'll buy like a Quantum whatever combo rod because like it's a brand that I know people use and it's like has a good warranty and stuff and reputation. So like that's what I'll buy. And do you think there's like basically in bass fishing there's the two types of reel. There's like the spin caster or whatever, and then there's the bait caster.
Yeah.
Do you think it makes a difference, in all honesty? Because I did get my first bait caster this year, and everybody that buys a bait caster goes through that whole frustrating tangling the living crap out of it and bird nesting it for forever until you figure it out. So is there any advantage you find to using a bait caster over just like an open face reel?
I do. Like a spinning reel, for me, I'm not as accurate with it for whatever reason. I just don't seem to use it for, if I need to be really accurate, I'm going to go with a bait caster. And like you said, with a bait caster, I don't like using really light lures, or if like I'm throwing a weightless technique, I end up just backlashing more than I'm spending more time digging it out than fishing. And so I'll switch to a spinning reel that way, just because it's less likely to get all tangled up and nasty. So I do think there are the advantages to like using a spinning reel at certain times versus a bait caster. But I've also, thrown like crankbaits and all my favorite stuff on a spinning reel that people would swear, oh, you have to have a bait caster for this. And you don't, like if a spinning reel is all you got, then great. I'm just saying that I'm more accurate with a bait caster. But I've also been using it a lot more for the last 5-10 years. So I've developed the skills needed to be more accurate. And I've used a spinning reel pretty much my whole life. And I'm still not as accurate with it for whatever reason. I think it does have to do partly with how the line spools off of the reel. Yeah. And it makes it a little bit less accurate. Whatever physics that involves, that's above my pay.
Yeah, I found, and I don't know if you find this to be the case as well, but with a bait caster, you generally need to be using like a lot heavier baits because I've tried to do lighters, even like a heavier shaky heads or something like that is like still not heavy enough. Yeah. I'm pretty much throwing like big giant bass jigs with that thing at this point in time because I know I won't screw it up.
And that's where, you got to start. Like as you get better with it, you will find that, I can throw a little bit lighter lures. But initially, like with the bass, a bait caster, I still couldn't even throw like crankbaits with it. They were too light, and especially like I'd throw with the wind and I'd be doing great. And then without thinking, I'd turn and throw against the wind and it would just be a ball of twine. And like, I was like, dude, where the heck did this come from? And it's just because that lighter lure screwed me up and I wasn't paying attention to it. Yep. And so I do find that as I've used them more and I've gotten a little bit more expensive bait casters, the reel specifically, that it's been a little bit better, but so I'll tell on myself. I went to Bass Pro and bought a reel that Edwin Evers uses, and Edwin's a local guy pro here that, they just talked me into it. I was like, oh yeah, he uses them. And it was only like $100. At the time I was using like Walmart, Abu Garcia Black Max combos. Yeah. And I went, bought it, hooked it up. To this day, I still cast half as far with that reel, even though I spent twice as much money with it. But for whatever reason, that reel it doesn't cast nearly as good as my cheap Walmart Abu Garcias. So back to the point of, does better always mean better, or more expensive always mean, not necessarily.
No.
But I did, you know, with those Abu Garcias, they cast a little better, so I can use lighter lures with them, is what I was getting at.
Yeah, and I was looking up on my phone, I was looking up the book I read during last year's whitetail season that really changed my perspective on a lot of this stuff too. It's called like Big Buck Secrets or something. It's just like I downloaded it on when I was in my tree stand, just kind of trying to, like, I'm always trying to learn. That's my thing.
Yeah.
Like learning skills. Aptitude Outdoors is based off of like learning new skills to get better at all of the stuff that you and I like to do. And like the guy who wrote the book was essentially slamming a lot of the like TV shows, and like I think he wrote this book even before like YouTube was a big thing and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And he was saying stuff like, you know, these guys come out here, they're sponsored by these companies to tell you to buy this stuff that's super expensive, which there's nothing wrong with that. Everybody has to make money. If I could make money selling sponsor stuff, I probably would do it, man, because it's a heck of a lot better than working a 9 to 5. But he's like, they come out here, they're always fishing like prime or hunting prime lakes or prime property that nobody else has access to. A lot of these places are installing their own habitat, and they're like making them ideal for the biggest, best fish. And then you go on there and watch these shows and you're like, I can do that if I have that rod or that gun or that feed or that target or whatever. Then you go out there and buy it and you still don't catch anything. And it's like, my perspective shifted to like, you really need to focus on the skill of understanding wildlife habitat, you know, species specific habitat. And, you know, we can talk about that with fishing too. Like, fish habitat, the way I understand it is like fish habitat is fish habitat. Like if there's structure, if there's rock piles, if there's a hump, if there's some sort of cover, they're going to aggregate there, whether it's a bluegill, whether it is a giant bass. Like fish want cover. And so I focus on learning the skill behind fishing rather than having the best gear. Do I have nice fishing gear? I have a few poles that are like $110, $120, but I don't have anything that's like $400 fishing poles.
Yeah, I don't either. I'm right.
I don't have a bass boat. I don't have an aluminum boat, a kayak, and a pontoon boat that my family has. Like that's what I have to fish with. Yeah. So how much time do you spend understanding fish habitat? I mean, you've been doing it your whole life, so it's probably a little different than someone like me who's learning in real time, but how important is that?
So I actually geek out on fish habitat because that's what I actually went to college for, was like wildlife management and stuff. And so that was like my driving force to go into college, was learning about primarily duck habitat, deer habitat, and fish habitat.
Yeah.
And habitat is, like you said, you know, it could mean a whole lot of different stuff. So like in our farm ponds, I started building the brush shelters or whatever you want to call them, with like PEX pipe or whatever, and putting it in a bucket, filling it with concrete and throwing them out in the water. Yep. And that's fish habitat in the pond. Now in the lake, you know, it could be riprap, rock piles. It could be brush, real trees falling in, whatever. And then it could also be like river channels where you're fishing that steep bank. And so I think learning how fish relate to each one is really important. And I'm still learning to do that. So like down here, we have a lot of creek and river channels and then flats, and fish, you know, relate to everything a little bit differently. So if you've got a little rock pile on this flat, more than likely that's where the fish are going to be. And so you could fish the whole flat and not catch anything, but then you come up to this little rock pile and it's got 5 fish on it. And you're like, well, why weren't they out over here? Well, just because they feel safer next to something, you know, that instinctively they're still hiding from predators, or that's where their food's at. So the bigger fish like bass are going to be hunting the smaller fish and using that cover to hide and everything. So, you know, habitat, I'm still learning all about it, of course. And I think that's where like we connected really well, is that I continuously want to learn more and more. And I think that's the mark of a better outdoorsman than somebody who pretends to act like they know everything. Because like you said before we started, you know, the expert more than likely only is expert in this one little tiny narrow thing, they know a lot about it. But if you get them out just a little bit of their comfort zone, they don't know that much. Mm-hmm. And so, even I've read a lot of from like Major League Fishing and Bassmaster stuff. They say, the expert guys that had this one technique going for them and they dominated for a while, they're not as good now. They've had to learn a broader spectrum of stuff. And so branching out to actually, learning techniques is great, but then branching out to where the fish are at is even better, and why they're there is even better. So what I'm learning now is how fish relate during specific times of the year. So you can go to the same body of water, and the pond, I'll use the ponds because I can go fish them anytime I want. And my ponds during the springtime, the fish are on the banks, they're relating to the banks, and you can catch the heck out of them. Summer moves around and it gets really hot like right now. And I've even got those brush piles out there close to the banks. The fish still aren't on those brush piles or on the banks 90% of the time. They're out in the middle where that water's a little bit deeper and cooler. Mm-hmm. Well, you translate that to a lake, it's the same thing. There's going to be more fish moving deeper and trying to find that cooler water instead of sweating to death. They don't sweat, but you get what I'm saying, being hot. Mm-hmm. And it's just figuring out where they are at that day, because sometimes they are really deep, and then you can go catch them really shallow even on hot days too. So it's like overwhelming to try to figure out exactly where they are. And even the pros, I mean, you look at the pros, they're still learning every single time they go to a new lake. It's something different, and it could be this looks the same as their home lake where they've always caught them this way at this time of year, but it fishes differently. Yeah. And so being willing to learn the habitat for your local lake I think it'll greatly increase your effectiveness in fishing. Like when I went up to Michigan for the first time, like I said, it was a whole new experience. I've never fished anything like this, but I quickly found, because the water was crystal clear, I could see fish in shallows, but I couldn't get them to bite. I saw giant smallmouth. I was like, well, we saw 14 and I got like 2 bites. But then I could move to a little bit deeper drop off in a rock pile and I'd catch 2 or 3 off of it. And I was like, okay, I never saw them, but they're relating to this rock pile a little bit better. Even though I saw a bunch in the shallows, they weren't in a biting mood for whatever reason. And maybe that's just where they go to hang out and relax, and then they come to feed on the rock piles. So understanding, what they use the cover for, I guess would be my point with that.
And I read this book not too long ago. It was like How to Catch Slab Crappies or something, like an old book. I think it was in Fisherman or something, some magazine that I don't know if they're still in print or anything, but it was pretty interesting because it was so packed full of information. The whole book is basically about habitat. It was basically about where a fish is going to be during what time of the year and what the water conditions are. And it was like so overwhelming to first read, because it's like, well, in the summer, they're going to be deeper, but they might be around cover or they might be spread out throughout the lake. And the best way to catch them is to just troll around and find them. And then even if you find them, there might only be 5 of them there. And then it's like, but in the spring, they're going to be up on the shore in cover and in the weeds, and they're going to be easier to catch, but they're going to be over their nests. So you don't want to catch a ton of them because if they take them away, their eggs are going to get eaten. There's going to be less crappie. And it's just like, when do I fish these things? How? Why? There's so many rules, but it makes sense, like from a habitat perspective of like, you don't want to, and a conservation perspective, you don't want to just slaughter them in the spring when they're easy to catch as much as you like to. Yeah. Because then like the rest of the year, you're going to be paying for that. And like, I don't know. I have a hard time with it because like we all want to catch fish. Like there's no doubt about it. I get excited if I catch a fish most of the time because it's just a hard game. And then you get out there and like I caught some pretty decent crappie this year just trolling or fishing spots where I thought they'd be. And then, there's been the last month I haven't caught a single one. They're just like elusive right now and I can't find them. And even trolling, like I'm just not getting anything. And I think that's just like you said, late summer, they're hard to find, man. Like they don't really have a reason to like, they're not spawning or anything. They're not super hungry. Yeah. Tons of bait fish in the lake. So they're like, I don't want your fake crap. I think there's so many conditions that make it a difficult game. It's like chess in real life in a way for me. There's like so many moves that you can make and they might be smart. They might be dumb. Like you never know what's going to happen. So I don't know. And I think a lot of people that get frustrated and give up on fishing have their expectations set so high. Like I know as an outdoorsman for doing this stuff for years and years and years that none of this stuff is easy. Hunting is not easy. Fishing is not easy. So what do you have anything like you would tell people who are just getting into it about like maybe not giving up on their first month of fishing after they haven't caught a world record, like 14-pound bass or something?
So, like, I'm one of those people that I really get my expectations high. And I think it really comes down to, well, we go and watch all the YouTube videos or whatever. And, these people are just slamming them like, oh, well, that's how fishing then. You go catch 50 fish every time you go out and you get that expectation in your head. And in reality, number one, they're probably fishing like I said, a private lake that's been stocked and really well maintained, or, and it just gives people an unrealistic expectation. And so I find myself with the same mentality of, hey, enjoy the process, first of all. Like, you're out here fishing and take this moment to learn as far as, okay, well, this didn't work. Maybe these are the reasons why it didn't work, even though, quote unquote, I thought it was the perfect time to use this lure. Apparently it wasn't. And maybe this is why, maybe it's not, but, just take a moment to absorb the information and understand a little bit of like, the reasons why you didn't catch fish or you did catch a fish. So I've been watching a lot of Edwin Evers YouTube videos, and he, what stood out to me was he would remember exactly the cast he made with the lure, and write it all down and everything. And I'm not that detailed, but he would go back and make that same cast to see if there were other fish. And I was like, I've never done that before. I catch the fish, I reel it in, and then I kind of make a similar cast maybe, but definitely not the same exact cast and everything. And so just being able to learn from that one moment is critical. And, but setting your expectations is the main thing. Like if you understand that most of these people that we go and watch, they're not going to be willing to show you, hey, I fished for 14 hours and didn't get a single bite. I'm even guilty of that. Like I'll go out and I'm like, man, if I catch one fish, I'll post the video. But if I don't catch anything, I'm like, I don't know. I don't think it's that entertaining I wouldn't want to watch it. And so I don't post it. So you've got to remember that most of these people that post on social media or TV shows, well, it's their highlight reel. It's not the real process that they went through, no matter how honest they claim to be, And another thing that I keep in mind is everybody focuses on who wins the tournament of like a bass fishing tournament, but scroll all the way down to the bottom and see that, hey, even the pros have really bad days where they catch 2 fish, no fish, whatever, like these guys that that's what gives me more hope is, hey, these guys have been doing it their whole lives. They're like top of their field and they still have bad days. And so me as an okay angler, I can't expect to just go slam every time.
Well, and that's not to talk like smack about all the people out there on YouTube killing. I mean, there's some awesome channels of people doing amazing stuff. It's just, I think, and obviously what you said is relatable to everyone. Like nobody's going to go out and like post a picture like I went fishing all day and I didn't catch anything. Like nobody gives a shit about that. Like I wouldn't want that either. But like, I think that what I'm getting at is that people think that's how fishing is. But I'm a realist, and I've fished enough and hunted enough to know that that is absolutely not how it is. Yes. And but I enjoy, like you said, that process of learning and screwing it up. Like if you accept that you're going to suck at it and just screw it up a ton, then it just is. It is what it is. Like you just enjoy going through the motions and figuring it out. And one of the things that I do that I catch myself doing is I just hop from place to place to place to place. Like I'll go here one day. I never really sit down and focus on one place to learn it really well. I'm always like, what's over that next ridge? What's over that next pond? What's over that? So it's like I'm always shotgun blasting and I don't take the time to really dig into one specific place. But like that's how I am with everything, like any outdoors activity. Like I can hop in a kayak and go out and go with the best of them, or I can go on a trail run, or I could go hunting with anyone. Am I going to be the first place championship winner every time? No, but I show up and I put in the work. Like that's my thing. Like I'm just there and I do it. And I think if you can accept that, I think you'll be more successful in the long term because you're not like putting the bar so high on yourself so early. It'd be like buying a race car and then going out and expecting to win like Daytona or something. Like, no, you have to learn how to drive first. Like it's not just your daily driver, So
exactly.
I think that's really important. But in Oklahoma, I know some people out there. One of my good friends, Derek, is from Oklahoma, and Todd Craighead is a guy I've had on the podcast. He's a great guy. He's out there in Oklahoma. And what are some misconceptions about Oklahoma that maybe people wouldn't think about? Because from what everybody that's from there has told me, it's a super awesome place. And I need to check it out more myself because it just looks beautiful.
So I think I don't really know about misconceptions. I know in high school there was a girl that moved to Oklahoma from like California or somewhere. And she literally told us, well, I thought everybody still lived in teepees out here. And I'm like, really? Come on. Like, I
think that's just called being stupid.
Yeah. I was like, what? But so, yeah, we don't live in teepees. I mean, some people still might. But for the most part, we have real houses. So that's one misconception that I've heard that I was like, I don't know. But I appreciate like the diversity. So like you, I'm kind of one of them guys that, what's around the next bend? Like, I think that's why I like river fishing so much is because you're going down and you're like, okay, this hole was really good. But what about the next one? Where's the next one at? And it's just like, oh, maybe. And then like with my duck hunting, I grew up hunting farm ponds mostly, and then the big lake. And now I'm like, okay, what have I not done? Well, I hadn't done a lot of field hunting, so I want to do that. Well, I haven't done a lot of like sea duck. I haven't done any sea duck hunting, so I want to go do that. And just kind of, like I said, getting a mixture of everything. Am I going to be great at any of it? Probably not, but I'm going to have fun doing it. Mm-hmm. And so in Oklahoma, we've got a huge diversity where like in Northeast Oklahoma, we've got hills, pasture land. It's like cattle land now. It used to be pretty good farmland, but now it's turned into more cattle land. And then the Southeast is a little bit more wooded, and logging is the big main driver of industry. And then the central part, of course, is like opening up into a little bit more plains and open and stuff. And then you go out west, like southwest, there's actually some mountains, and they're not giant, but they're mountains. I actually killed an elk out there a few years ago.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. And growing up, I didn't realize Oklahoma had elk until I heard about this hunt and went out there and in the mountains and got to hunt elk. It was really awesome. And then like the northwest part is just flat farmland. I mean, you can see for 10 miles, and it's, if you see a tree, you're lucky kind of thing. And then, you go out to the very panhandle of Oklahoma, and there's actually a little bit of a desert. And then there's like the mesas and stuff. And I'd say that they're all, some aspect is my favorite of all of them. Because, like, of course, I'm home here in Northeast Oklahoma, but I've got great memories of going down to Southeast Oklahoma on the clear rivers and creeks and trout fishing. I've got great memories in Southwest Oklahoma for killing elk and going camping in the mountains. And then duck hunting is great out in the northwestern part. And then in college, we went out to the Mesa country and everything and got to chase kangaroo rats and stuff. And it was just I've got, all of them are my favorite, and the diversity of it is, I think, the driving factor of why Oklahoma is so great. And it's centrally located in the U.S. So, if I want to go to the East Coast, then it's not going to be as bad if I lived in the western part of the state, or if I want to go west, it's not going to be bad if, in north, south, same thing. So I think the diversity is my favorite part of it. But as far as misconceptions go, I really don't know what other people say. It's really windy here. That's not a misconception. Trying to film videos is like you just get used to the wind noise, and you're like, listen, I'm sorry. This is the best I can do.
Yeah, I can relate. Up here in Northwest Ohio, it is very windy all the time, it seems like. So I share the struggle with you. But Oklahoma seems to be an awesome place. I mean, everybody I know from there loves it. I mean, everybody that I know from anywhere says that the place they live is the best place. And
yes.
It's whatever. It's all relative. But I mean, as far as like wildlife opportunities, you just hit the nail right on the head of kind of what I was getting after. Is like you can go everywhere in the state. To me, it sounds a little like, I shouldn't say this because I know you Oklahomans don't like Texas that much sometimes. but I mean, in relation to the size and the scale and the diversity of what things are like ecology wise, like there's so much different parts of the land. Like in Ohio, we have a lot of farmland. We have a lot of, in the South, we have like a lot of rolling hills. It's like the foothills of like the Appalachians and stuff like that. Yep. But I mean, there's not a ton of diversity. There is, like, I'm not saying there's no diversity, but it's Ohio's Ohio when you think of it. Like that's what it's like. But like you think of Oklahoma and you just said all these different landscapes overall within one state. That's insane. Yeah. Like I've seen pictures of like the canyons and the mesas and stuff out there. Beautiful looking. And then I would imagine the Southeast, like you said, would be like kind of like the Texas piney woods looking kind of area, like similar habitat. Yes. And then so like there's so many different places, and you got an elk in Oklahoma. I never would have crossed my mind. So what was that experience like, man? Because that's everybody's like pinnacle. I feel like everybody's like, oh, if I could hunt one thing, it would be an elk. Is it that cool?
So I've got a YouTube video on my personal channel for that, and the story behind it, if you don't care that I tell the story, just
go ahead.
So my dad drew in either the year before or 2 years before, I can't remember, and literally he went out there, and he went out there actually with an old church buddy who drew in at the same time. They didn't realize it until they got there and everything, or right before, and so they camped together, but they were done in like 30 minutes. Like the sun pops up, he hears his buddy shoot. His buddy calls him, said, "Hey, they're heading your way. Get ready." They're coming across the clearing, and my dad drops a cow, and their hunt was over. It was time to start packing meat, and they were done in like 30 minutes. Wow. And so me being a little smart aleck and moronic at the time, I was like, I'm going to enjoy this hunt, and I'm going to make it last more than 30 minutes. Well, literally like sunrise, shooting light, I have a herd of cows, and I drew a cow tag, walk 150 yards away, and I'm like, nah, I let them go. And I was like, there's got to be plenty there. Well, I walked like 15 miles that day and spooked a few, and I didn't know really what I was doing because I've always sat in a deer stand, and they came to me kind of thing. So that night I got a few pointers from one of the guides. He just kind of shows us around, and they took us to a spot and dropped us off, and we started walking. And he said, here, go here, do this. And so I went there and did that. And the morning he drops me off, and I can hear them all just chattering up over this hill on this clearing. And I was like, oh, I'm going to be done in 30 minutes again. And so I pop up, and sure enough, there's some grazing out here, and I can't get close enough. It's just wide open, and, there's a little hill here, so I try to use it as cover. And right when I come around, some spook way over here that I never even saw, and so it scares the ones that I was looking at off. And to shorten the story, I finally chased one group like 10 miles deep, and I was like, forget this. I came back and talked to the guy. He's like, here, there's usually some grazing in this pasture. We'll go here. Sure enough, I walk up, and I'm walking along a wood line, and I look, and there's a cow, just one cow coming up, grazing by itself. I was like looking around, making sure there was nothing else to see me. So I scoot up, I get ready, looking down my scope, I glass it, make sure that it's a cow. I don't see any antlers sticking out, nothing. I'm like, okay, I'm going to pull the trigger. Well, I get all sighted up, front shoulder, pull the trigger, and the rock that I'm leaning on just explodes in front of me. And I was like, what the crap just happened? And that's when I realized that my barrel was up against the rock, and I had a clear shot with my scope, but my barrel wasn't clear. And it was a super rookie mistake of not taking the time to see that, hey, dummy, your barrel has to clear the rock first. And so thank goodness the elk ran like 20 yards, stopped, and was kind of just looking around like, what the heck happened? Didn't really know, and went back to grazing. So I turned, set up a little higher this time, pulled the trigger, and dropped it. Well, I'm walking up, and I'm super pumped, because at this point I was starting to get a little worried. Like, I had really highs and really lows. And I was like, man, I've only got 3 days to hunt, so I better get it done today if I really want to get it done. And as I'm walking up, I'm like, man, so happy that this happened. And then I look at the head, and it's got little nub antlers.
Oh.
And I was like, my heart just sunk again. I was like, are you kidding me? I glassed this thing for like 20 minutes, making sure that I saw nothing. Well, I was like, there's nothing I can do now. I've already shot it, and I'm not going to leave it laying here.
Yeah.
And so I called my dad. I was like, hey, good news, I shot one. Bad news, it's a bull, not a cow. And he said, well, I'm standing right here next to the wardens and the guys who are helping. I'll tell them, and we'll go from there, pay a fine or whatever I got to do.
Yeah.
And so they're like, bring the head back. That way we can see, what really happened. And so I'm just upset at this point, but I start cleaning it, and they bring my dad out there to help me carry some meat back for the night. And I brought the head back too. And what actually had happened was the antlers grew down instead of up, and they were they were nubs.
Yeah.
And the hairline hit it. So legally that was a cow still, because when they do their counts and everything, if it's not above the hairline, it's a cow. And they, the game warden said it. Everybody was like, there's no way we could have been able to tell that was a bull from, unless you walked up on it and saw it there.
Yeah.
And so long story short, I didn't have to pay the fine. I didn't have to do anything. They let me keep the head and stuff as a reminder that, hey, congratulations, you screwed up, Wes. But the meat was delicious. And it's a memory that I'll never forget of elk hunting in Oklahoma, that growing up, I never thought I'd have the chance to go elk hunting, because, you go to Colorado or New Mexico somewhere, and it's like 10, 15 grand. I'm like, I can't afford to spend that on and then spend 2 weeks trying to find it, or a week trying to hunt it. So it was worth it in the end, but it was very like roller coaster of emotions, up and down, up and down. I was super frustrated and super happy, and but it all ended well.
Well, that's awesome. And that's, sometimes it's just, that's the way it is, man. It's not like I said, it's not an easy thing. Like you're looking through binoculars, it's all disorienting, you know, you're looking through binoculars, whatever you got, and you're already like tired as hell, beat up, you're just like exhausted. And then, you know, usually on a hunt, anything that can go wrong will go wrong. So it's like another one of those things. And it's just like it just goes to show that like not everything is an episode of like your favorite hunting show. It's like stuff happens that like more times than not, it doesn't go the way you want it to. And that's like, that's something I always try and preach on this show is like, I'm a realist, man. Like things don't ever go right. That's just how things work. And like, I think more people kind of need to feel that when they get into this kind of stuff because it's not an easy game. I probably said that like 10 times in this episode, but looks like we're running pretty good on time here. So before we go, you know, you want to let people know more about Your Bass Guy and like where they can learn more about anything that you're writing and stuff too, because that would be awesome to read. So knock it out. Let them know where they can find you online.
So I'm a freelance writer. My primary company that I write for is yourbassguy.com. And it's targeted towards beginner and intermediate anglers, primarily bass anglers who, you know, are either first getting into it or getting back into it after a long, hot stint of work getting in the way and whatever. And so we target, you know, your basic bass rigs. We'll have videos and articles on that. And then we'll go into, you know, kind of how to fish during certain seasons, what some of the best locations to fish. You know, if you need this information or any information on bass fishing, we're trying to cover it to help our readers as best we can. So you can go to yourbassguy.com. There's a YouTube channel, Your Bass Guy YouTube. And then my personal stuff is more of just my adventures with my family and myself of primarily kayaking and kayak fishing, kayak hunting. And like I said, primarily it's going to be bass fishing, cat fishing. I do a little bit of trout fishing and, of course, duck hunting. And that's just what I enjoy, what I do. Yeah. And, you know, if anybody wants to reach out to me, feel free to go to Your Bass Guy and all my reach out information's on there. Find me on YouTube. And, you know, I just want to say thanks for having me on. I had a blast talking, you know, it's been, I'm always down to talk hunting, fishing, anything.
Yeah. So. Yeah, man, I appreciate it. I know I learned a lot. I have a hard time finding people that really are like just into all the different things in the outdoors. Like I know a lot of people who like one thing, but it's like really rare to find someone who's just like, I'll do all of it, man, because that's how I am. I just love getting out there. So, you know, keep up the good work, man. Go subscribe to the YouTube channel, both YouTube channels, Your Bass Guy and your personal channel, which I'll link all that stuff in either the show notes or the YouTube channel video for everyone to find. And Wesley, thanks, man. It was an awesome conversation.
Hey, thank you, Paul. It's been great.